Welcome to the Contreras Report, a special edition. I'm Raoul Lowry Contreras. We've got a guest today, our regular Ruben Navarrete, who is a columnist for the Washington Post Writers Group. He has written in the past for CNN, and the Arizona Republic in Phoenix, the Dallas Morning News in Dallas, and the San Diego Union. He also writes currently for the Daily Beast. Ruben gets around. He really does. And he sees things that I see, that we discuss all the time, or he sees things that I don't see, and he enlightens me, which is what he's going to do this time. Ruben, welcome.
Great to be back with you. Thank you, my friend.
Okay, the last week, a group, you can tell us who it is, it released a report about the American Latino or Hispanic GDP, gross domestic product. It quantifies it as $2.3 trillion in size. Tell us about it, Ruben.
Right, so the group at issue here, the group is called the Latino Donor Collaborative. It's a group, a relatively small group, maybe about 100 people, last I counted, of very wealthy Latino businessmen and women from around the country. They gather, and they have been meeting for the last 10 years or so, pushing this idea to corporations and to media that we are an important, dynamic, productive, economically viable group of Latinos in this country, and that oftentimes our media institutions and financial institutions don't get that, and they need to get it. And so that has been the goal of the Latino Donor Collaborative. Now, the Latino Donor Collaborative was started by two individuals, Henry Cisneros, the former mayor of San Antonio and HUD secretary, and Saul Trujillo, who is a businessman, a telecom mogul, who's based in California and elsewhere. And Saul also helped create something called Latitude, which is now, I believe, in its third or fourth year. It just wrapped up here in San Diego this weekend, and it's a conference. So the two come together as follows. The LDC report on the gross domestic product of Latinos at $2.3 to $2.7 trillion a year. That was unveiled at Latitude along with a lot of other data points. The bottom line is we are not a drain on this country. More and more, we are the mainstream. The country wouldn't survive without us, starting with California. California would be on bended knee if not for the contributions of Latinos in this state.
We should clear up one thing. There are some people that don't have a degree from Harvard like you do, or from San Diego State like I do, or have spent 30, 40 years writing about these issues. The gross domestic product is the total value of all goods and services and economic activity for the selected population, which in this case is the Hispanic population in America, which is 63 million people strong. Now,
right.
If you talk about a nation, the GDP of the United States, that's another subject. Of course, that's the total. In Mexico, is the same thing. And so it's the same definition for everything, except that it's measuring different groups of people. In this case, the 63 million, the contributions of goods and services by the 63 million people like Ruben Navarrete and me.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, God, tell us about that, because
right.
You come from a farm economy. And,
I do.
And only 5%. People don't understand. They think that the Mexican American in America is strictly a farm community, when only 5% of the Mexican American community in the United States is rural, is in the farm country. So talk about that.
Well, it's true. I mean, the 62 million Latinos in this country are mainly an urban population. We are to be found in the major cities of this country. We're to be found in Miami and in Dallas, New York, and Los Angeles. You know, you show me Phoenix, San Antonio, San Diego. You show me a city with over 1 million people in it, Houston, and I'll show you a big Hispanic population in that city. That's true. We do have it in our mind that we're a rural population, but I came from rural country. I'm a country mouse. I grew up in farm country in the San Joaquin Valley near Fresno. And what I can tell you from that vantage point is this. One of the most important economies, and perhaps the most important economy in California, is not Silicon Valley, and it's not Hollywood. That's just what white liberals in New York come to first. It's agriculture. Agriculture produces $50 billion a year in revenue for the state of California, $50 billion. And we don't tend to respect farmers because they don't wear suits to work. They wear, jeans and plaid shirts to work. But they are a powerhouse economically. And farmers would not be able to do that if not for farm workers who were exclusively Mexican, almost all undocumented. And so it's no exaggeration for me to sit here and say, gee, if you didn't have undocumented immigrants in California, you wouldn't have farming, you wouldn't have $50 billion a year, you wouldn't have a Californian anymore. So it's both those things at once. We are primarily an urban people, but our contributions in the rural areas are enormous. We ought to just say, you're welcome, California. Thank you, you're welcome. Now stop bitching about us and complaining about us, because without us, you'd be laying dried up like a raisin in the sun.
I'm reminded, as you say that Victor Davis Hansen, the retired historian from Cal State Fresno, who's very prominent in conservative ranks, wrote a book called Mexifornia, in which he's highly critical of the Mexican-American population, and particularly that of the Central Valley, where he's from. His family has had a family farm outside of Fresno, around Selma, as I recall, for a long time. And he's very critical of the Mexican-American. They don't want to get educated. Of course, that means he's never met you or me, but the thing that cracks me up is he's retired from a tenured professorship at Cal State Fresno, or Fresno State, as some people call it. And when he retired 3 or 4 years ago, 50% of the enrollment of Cal State Fresno, California State University Fresno, was Hispanic. And
right.
He keeps writing and saying that we don't appreciate education.
Yeah.
I don't understand people like that.
One thing I've learned in 30 years of writing, and writing about politicians in particular, I've become intimately acquainted with the concept of the smart, stupid person. And the smart, stupid person is the person who has a law degree from a fancy place, or in Victor Davis Hansen's case, a PhD. He's written tons of books on the classics, on military history. And he is, in some regards, a very bright person. But when he leaves his arena and he starts talking about this stuff, which is really my arena, then he really says some stupid things. And one thing I should point out is, while he was at Fresno State, a college I know well, I took classes at Fresno State for a year away from Harvard. I taught there at 23. I love Fresno State. Well, Fresno State operates on booster money from football games when the Bulldogs do well. And a lot of those people are Armenian farmers and farmers in general. So let me get this straight. Farmers in general produce a lot of money for Fresno State, but you're going to somehow badmouth the immigrants who keep the farmers in business? So, gee, here's a theory. If not for illegal immigrants contributing to farmers and farmers contributing to Fresno State would also shrivel up like a little raisin in the sun. So again, just stop bitching. Just say thank you. I'll say thank you. You're welcome. Because I think there's a disconnect there. I'll say this one last thing. I've had very smart professors of mine from Harvard. I've mentioned Victor Davis Hansen to them, or they've mentioned him to me. And they'll say, even as conservatives in some cases, they'll say, this is really a cautionary tale for what happens when somebody with a PhD in one field thinks he's an expert in all fields.
Yeah.
In the law, if you're good in maritime law, don't go practice corporate law or criminal law. And in this case, he is really good in his space, but he is out of his depth when he talks about immigration, about Latinos, and really about California.
That's absolutely true. And I think the people that are watching and listening to this need to understand that. I'll tell you a quick story. When I decided to start writing professionally, it was back in 1988, actually at the end of 1987. And I had just bought a new computer for my business. I was a mortgage broker. And I taught myself how to use the computer by writing a book. And then the next thing I did is I wanted to be the new political columnist on the scene that everybody read with 600 columns a week published around the country, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The same thing you did when you first started. And so I taught myself how to use the computer. And then I found the book Mexifornia. I heard about it. I went and bought it. It was not published by a publisher for profit. It's a non-profit institution. And the thing that I noticed most was, and I learned a great lesson from this, is that Victor Davis Hansen didn't put one single footnote in that book. It's 100 and some odd pages. It's not a very thick book. And it's totally critical of Mexicans. He hates Mexico, he hates the Roman Catholic religion, and he hates illegal immigrants, even though I doubt if his family from Scandinavia had papers when they landed in New York. In any event, that's the one big lesson I learned, Ruben, and I'm sure you do it too. You document everything. Somehow, you don't need to put it in a footnote, but you put a reference to the direct quotation of where it came from. Because his book, Mexifornia, was all opinion, and any, quote, facts, unquote, that he used were strictly out of his head. He didn't document them in any way, shape, or form. So that was the one big lesson, and I have been harping on him ever since because he does this all the time. You and I, we write opinion pieces that are distributed nationally and read by a lot of people. You're the #1 read Hispanic writer in the country, and I'm probably right behind you somewhere, maybe 50,000 people less a week. But the fact of the matter is that I never put anything in print that I can't back up. And in my books, I do the same thing. I don't like the footnote routine because I don't care for it, although we both learned it well in college. What I do is I incorporate it into the actual body of work. If I say Cal State Fresno has 50% Hispanic student body, I say that the California State University system says in their annual report, blah, blah, blah. And that's how I document everything. So here we have a 2.3 trillion sub-economy in the United States of people like you and me, all millions of us. And the people in the United States don't know.
And not just the people you and me. This is, I think, interesting. Mexico also deserves some humility in this, okay? Mexico would not be Mexico if not for the $25 billion a year sent home in remittances from Mexicans who work in the United States.
I have to correct you there.
What's the new figure?
I keep careful track
What's the new figure?
And it's 4.7 billion average per month this year.
So that's up now to almost 50.
Yeah, it'll be almost $50 billion. Now, there are Americans who criticize that and said, well, that's
my figure's an old figure.
But it is taxed.
My figure is an old figure. My figure is an old figure, and it does fluctuate. But here's the main point about the number: 25 to 50 billion a year sent in from not just you and me, not Mexican Americans at all. I'm not sending my money to Mexico. It's the same Mexican immigrants, like my grandfather, who came from Chihuahua, the people who came from nothing, and the people who were sort of despised in Mexico and pushed out of Mexico, who now wait tables in Las Vegas, who now work on a construction site in Dallas. Those people who don't have college degrees and didn't go to Harvard or Fresno State or San Diego State, why? Those people are also contributing. So that GDP, that 2.3 trillion, is not just people like you and me. It's also a lot of other people out there who, again, Mexico should just say thank you to, because there is a temptation among the Mexican elite. If you go to Mexico City, you talk to the Chilangos, they're not saying, oh yeah, there's a farm worker up in Fresno who's keeping us alive. No, they don't connect the dots, but I'm here to connect the dots, and that's true.
Let me explain that word Chilango, because I am one. The Chilango is a nickname that the Mexico City residents give themselves.
Yeah.
So that, and they have an attitude in Mexico City like the people in New York have about the rest of the country. As far as the New Yorkers are concerned, the American desert starts at the Hudson River. Well, in Mexico City, the land of the savages starts at the city limits of Mexico City.
That's true. So, that's what they say.
I tell people, especially here in Baja California, that I'm a Chilango. When they ask me, generally speaking, they'll ask me how I learned my Spanish, and I tell them, well, actually, that was my first language. And then I tell them I'm a Chilango, and they go, oh. And of course, that sets me apart. When I say I'm a Chilango, that means I'm better than you are because I'm from Mexico City, because that's the Mexico City attitude.
And that's the New York attitude, exactly.
Yeah,
that's the way New York sees the world, yeah.
That's the American attitude about.
And for those people, and this is what I need to say, and for those people, and my wife is from Guadalajara, and her father was a lawyer, her grandfather was a doctor. My father was a cop, and my grandfather was a farm worker. So clearly I married up, right? That's what we would say. But when I have been to Guadalajara, to the country clubs in Guadalajara, or I've been to Mexico City on La Reforma, at the Starbucks across from the Four Seasons, or wherever I've been, I see a whole class of Mexicans, and the last people that they're thinking about are the Mexican immigrants.
Exactly.
The Mexican immigrants who got pushed out. But without those Mexican immigrants, Mexico City would be in great difficulty. Without the people who came from Oaxaca and everywhere else into Mexico City would be in great difficulty. But it's human nature to think we got here on our own. For the Americans, let me pick on the Americans for a second. For the American who walks around and says, I live in Del Mar, I live in Carlsbad, I'm rich, and it's all because I'm the smartest person in the room. Oh, crap, bull crap. In many cases, who do you think cuts your lawn when you come home at night? It wasn't little elves, who came in the middle of the day, who did it. So I think it's human nature to believe somehow that we have everything that we have because of our own gifts and our own hard work. But in reality, the country of Mexico owes a debt. The American people owe a debt. The United States owns a debt. California owns a debt. We all owe a debt in many parts to these Mexican, hardworking Mexican people who we typically look down on.
Well, Mexico is California's best customer, and in spite of the fact that we dominate the trade with the Asia, Mexico is still our number one customer here in California. Same thing with Texas. In Texas, they do $100 billion worth of business a year in Texas. If it wasn't for Mexican trade, Texas would cease to exist. All it would do would be to produce oil. And California produces oil. New Mexico produces oil.
And you can't convince a Texan. You can't convince a Texan of that, because the Texan has a very high opinion of himself, just like Chilango does, just like the New Yorker does. Everybody thinks they got here on their own. And we could all use some humility to recognize that, yes, you're right. NAFTA was a boon for Texas. Texas was the number one winner of NAFTA. And so after NAFTA, after the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed into law, and you had all this trade, it benefited Dallas and Houston and the border regions and the like. So you're totally right, but that's not the American way, and it's not human nature to somehow give credit to the other guy. It was always me. It was me.
Well, I'll give you credit as the best read Hispanic columnist in the country, because you can prove it. And I've seen the actual data. And all I know is that I don't know what my data is, but I know that when I send an article out every week, newspapers like Hoy in Delaware, the New Jersey Hispanic papers, the Long Island papers, they all print me. Miami, they all do. And Detroit, I've been in Detroit, being published in Detroit since 1989, every single week. There's a whole section at the, Wayne State University? Is that the name of the college there?
Yeah.
There's a whole section there for the El Central newspaper. And then they've got a subsection with just my columns. How many columns is that since 1989, every week? In any event, look, Ruben, this has been a terrific discussion. I hope we've thrown some light on a subject which most Americans are totally unfamiliar with. But we are a rising economic force, you and I and the farm workers and everybody, the women who take care of the children in Del Mar and Carlsbad, while the women can go out and make $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year to supplement the family income, so that their median family income of that group, at least in San Diego County, is probably an $80,000, $90,000 median income level for the families that can afford the Mexican criada to take care of their children, or the landscapers to do the work. In any event, Ruben, thank you for being with us, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being there. If you want to subscribe to this channel, you will be notified whenever we post a new edition like this one. And you can also write us. You'll have the email address on your screen in a moment. And you can write a comment or question, and I will respond as quickly as I can. Thank you for being there. We'll see you next time.